All right, so as I'm driving here right now, it is May 2021, which means it's the 30-year anniversary of the recording of an album that changed the music industry forever. And it all happened right here in the San Fernando Valley. So what I figured I'd do is take you guys on a tour of where Nirvana lived, rehearsed, recorded, mixed, and maybe even bought some beer while they recorded their legendary album, Nevermind. You know, I watched an interview a few years back with Foo Fighters frontman Dave Grohl, who also was the drummer of Nirvana, and he said that every time he travels back to Seattle, he rents a car and drives around to the locations that meant something to him 30 years ago. And I think for anyone who's a fan of art or movies or anything else like that, the locations where scenes are shot or where albums are recorded, they have an energy to them because they're connected to this amazing piece of art that people created. So as someone who moved to LA 25 years ago to get in the entertainment industry, I was amazed as I drove around LA and had people point out different locations that had been in movies, just how much entertainment history is here and how close together it is. And so in researching the recording of Nevermind, I knew it was done at a studio in Van Nuys, but I did not know just how long they'd stayed here and just how close together it is. So this will be a fun thing to drive you past the locations and show you on a map. The first place we're going up Barham here. If you went over the hill here to the left, you'd see Universal City. And as we go down the hill further past this apartment complex, we will see Warner Brothers. So this was an apartment complex that was corporate housing where they rented an apartment for the guys in Nirvana to stay while they recorded this album. So as I pull in here, it's now called Ava. And this was the corporate housing that was rented for Nirvana while they recorded this album. So a cool story about this is that this was a place where a lot of young actors would come and stay. If you booked a pilot and you didn't want to rent an apartment for long term, you could rent short-term apartments here. So as Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic pointed out, the band Europe, who had the hit song The Final Countdown, was staying here at the same time they were staying here. So yeah, I'll start pulling down here. You can see the gate going in there. I'm not sure which apartment they stayed in, but yeah, so this place has a ton of history. This is literally where a lot of young actors, a lot of young musicians come and stay short term. Obviously, a small percentage of them become wildly successful, but with that amount of people staying here, there is obviously a lot of stories of success too. Also, interestingly enough, Dave Grohl told the story that after recording one night, he and Kurt Cobain would watch TV late into the night, and one night they saw this documentary on underwater childbirth that they thought was interesting, and that may very well have been the reason why the album cover ended up being a child underwater chasing a dollar bill on a fishhook. Who knows? So after Nirvana landed here, in the couple of days before they went in to record the album, they rented a rehearsal space to tighten up their sound, to show Butch Vig all of the songs and stuff. So that's where we're on our way now. It's a place called Third Encore Studios up in North Hollywood. But as you can see here, we are driving by here right on the right-hand side. This is Warner Brothers Studios. You may recognize this gate on your right-hand side as we pass by. This is a gate that's been in many, many movies. Blazing Saddles is a famous one where they all kind of pour out of the studio. I think that gate is also kind of featured in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, when Pee-wee sneaks onto the lot to try to get his bicycle back. But you can see this is a massive lot that includes outdoor locations, includes, I believe, like an old West town. Like, it is a massive old production lot. So it's interesting to note that this was Nirvana's second album. Their first album, Bleach, came out just about 2 years prior to Nevermind, maybe 2.5 years. And when they were looking for a producer, this was really when they were signed to Geffen. This was a big label recording. I think they had $60,000 was their budget for this, and it ended up going more like $120,000 by the time it was done. But the label was pitching them kind of these big name producers, and Butch Vig at the time was a guy who recorded in a studio up in Madison, Wisconsin, and had worked with the guys, I believe it's April of 1990, so almost a year, little more than a year, prior to the recording of Nevermind. They had went to Wisconsin and recorded with Butch Vig. They had a very good rapport with him, and so when the selection of a producer was being chosen, they actually chose Butch Vig because they had a relationship with him and they felt like they could work well with him. And as Butch Vig has said in many interviews, the recording of Nevermind changed his career forever. A lot of people know Butch Vig only as a guy who created the band Garbage, but obviously that producer moment put him on the map. So when he created Garbage, I'm sure the selling of Garbage and all of that stuff was helped by the fact that he was who he was. So another little interesting footnote is that after Butch Vig was hired to be the producer of Nevermind, they originally slated to come out here in LA in March of 1991 and start recording, but Butch Vig had to push it back 3 weeks, and then I guess at the end of that 3 weeks he pushed it back again, and so the guys from Nirvana were wondering what the hell was he recording that he couldn't come out and do it. And when he told them Smashing Pumpkins, Butch Vig was, I guess, doing Smashing Pumpkins, the album Gish, the guys in Nirvana thought that Smashing Pumpkins was the worst band name they've ever heard. So that's a little funny side note. So we've seen where Nirvana lived. Now, they started recording at Sound City, the actual album, on May 2nd. But a couple of days before that, they booked this rehearsal space to kind of tighten up their sound. It's where they and Butch Vig would meet for the first time in LA. And so they rented this rehearsal space at a place called Third Encore Studios, which is coming up here on the right. And so as we make this right here, you will see the studio really quickly here on your left-hand side. You can see Third Encore is still up there. And the pull into this location is this little tunnel-looking thing. Now I'm going to pull up and I'll do a U-turn. But as we pass by here, you'll see this is the entrance right here. And maybe I can even pull in there and get a quick look. I don't know exactly what rehearsal space they were in. Let me see if I can just pull in here and U-turn. So yeah, as we pull in here, you can see this is the space where they were at. They rehearsed in one of these big buildings here. And the interesting story about this is that this is where Butch Vig heard Smells Like Teen Spirit for the first time. I guess they had sent him Smells Like Teen Spirit on a boombox recording, but he really couldn't feel the sound or whatnot. And so he tells the story that when he came in here, the first song that they played him was the song Smells Like Teen Spirit. And in his words, the minute it started, and we all know how it starts with the guitar and Dave Grohl really hitting those drums, he said it was such an exciting moment. He stood up and just started pacing and sweating. And he can answer this better than I can, but I can only assume that sweating was about the energy of the song and the fact that they were going to record it and just that electric moment of hearing that iconic song for the first time. And so it's great to know that as much as that song resonated with the public and the video and everything else like that, it also resonated with Butch Vig right from the very beginning. So that's a cool story about how hearing that song for the first time gave him the feeling that it gave all of us. So the other story that Butch Vig told in the 20th anniversary for this was that this was the place where basically the record label left them alone to record this whole thing. But they did say on one of the last days of rehearsal here, they were going to drop by at a certain time, like 3 o'clock, to hear some songs, check in with the band, meet them, whatever. And so they were here waiting for the record label to show up, and they didn't show up. And it was an hour later, 2 hours later, and they didn't show up. So what Butch Vig decided to do, he says he went across the street and bought some Jack Daniels and some beer. And if you look across the street here, there is a place called Jetstream Liquor. Now, you wonder why it's called Jetstream Liquor, and there's a picture of a plane on it. This is literally just on the edge of the runways of the Burbank Airport. If I zoom out here, you can see that this is the Burbank Airport, so it's a great place to have a rehearsal space. You're not going to get noise complaints because the planes are making more noise than you ever could. But so they went across the street. They bought their stuff there, and so by the time the record label showed up. Apparently, the whole band and Butch were a little tipsy. They still made it through 4 songs, pleased the record label, but they tell the story that Chris Novoselic was so kind of liquored up that he went into the main office where no one was there and got on the intercom system and was paging Lenny Kravitz to come to the main studio so that he could meet him, and that Butch Vig had to run around the place to figure out where Chris was blasting this out from. So that's a funny little anecdote from the moment. And so with this, once they were done rehearsing here, they headed off to Sound City Studios. So we're going to drive across the valley and head over there to take a look at that location. So for the 20-year anniversary of Nevermind, Jon Stewart hosted a radio interview with Butch Vig, Dave Grohl, and Chris Novoselic, where they had a ton of journalists who showed up to ask questions about the album. And one of the questions the journalists kind of kept asking over and over about, and they were curious, was, did any of them feel like they were making an iconic album while they were recording it? And the overwhelming answer from all of them was no. And I think what you have to realize is that Chris Novoselic was 25. He turned 26 in the middle of recording this album. Kurt Cobain was 24, and Dave Grohl was just 22 years old. But that is one of the wild things with bands, is that Dave Grohl might have been 22, but he went on tour with a band called Scream when he was 17 and had basically been touring and playing nonstop for all that time. So by the time this opportunity rolled around, he was prepped and ready to do this. And he says as much. When he first heard about Nirvana and listened to their album, he knew that he could do well in this band. Another funny anecdote about the recording of Nevermind was the fact that Dave Grohl tells the story that Kurt Cobain, in singing these songs and putting everything he had into these songs, he kept every day kind of blowing out his voice. And they'd have to stop a session because he'd blown out his voice. So at some point they got him a session with a vocal coach to try to help him. And apparently Kurt came back with this cassette recording of the guy that had a bunch of vocal warm-ups that were like, me, 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 and boy, 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 and 2 guys in a punk band like this. They thought that was the most hysterical thing in the world, kind of laughed at it, threw the cassette in the trash, and Kurt went on about recording exactly the way he recorded before. So as we come around the corner here, you are going to see that Sound City Studios is right here on the right. And this is the studio where for 16 days, Nirvana showed up and recorded Nevermind. And by the way, if you get the chance, there is a documentary that Dave Grohl created about this location, this studio, that you have to watch. And it's called Sound City. And really the special part of this location was the fact that these guys invested in this board called the Neve board, which was some engineer created this board, and it's was apparently just an amazing sound. Now, unlike Pro Tools, which is a new way to record music where you can record just bits and pieces and chop them up, the thing with this was you had to be a very, very good band, because when you roll on 2-inch tape, you can't cut and piece it and splice it together. You can punch in little fixes here and there, but for the most part, you have to be a very skilled, tight group to do it. And the crazy part about this, so this thing started in the early 70s. They record like Fleetwood Mac, Cheap Trick, Tom Petty. There's just Rick Springfield was an artist who was signed by the guys who owned this and recorded his albums here. But by the time Nirvana was getting big in the 90s, this place was kind of falling out of favor with a lot of people. And so the fact that Nevermind was recorded here really kind of invigorated this business. And then off of the back end of Nevermind, the most famous one that I can think of is Rage Against the Machine recorded, and they actually did a weird thing where they put their studio together, had it sounding the way they wanted, and then they invited friends down and played a bunch of songs live for their friends, and that's how they got Killing in the Name of and 5 other songs apparently in one session. They just recorded it live to tape, and that is what you hear. And so when you watch the documentary of this, that's really what everyone is talking about, is that feeling that you get from a live show when a band is really tight and they're amazing. So often that gets corrupted between your live performance and when it transfers to albums. It loses that energy and spontaneity and really the magic. And anyone who's, gone and seen a band live and then bought the album and went, there's something missing here. That is the magic of what this is, and that's the magic of recording like this. And so it was such a nostalgic thing, but such a powerful thing for Dave Grohl that in 2011, this business went out of business. He ended up buying that Neve board, and you see it in the documentary get transferred out of this space and into his own production space, and he still records with it, and other bands record with it at his new facility even today. So it really is. It's a unique kind of one-of-a-kind space, and I'm happy that they still have Sound City on the outside of the building, because that's something cool to connect with the past. So one thing I wanted to talk about after seeing the recording studio is to talk about how whenever there's something that is iconic that's created, whether it's a movie or a TV show or an album, there's always an amazing kind of way that you can go back through and figure out how all of the pieces, all of the people, everything came together to make that project as special as it is. And with that, I wanted to talk about not only Dave Grohl, but how Dave Grohl and Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam's path is so similar and happened in really kind of the same time span. So with that, Dave Grohl started off his career at 17 years old, joining a band called Scream from the East Coast. He's with them for 2 or 3 years. They end up in LA on a tour, and their bass player leaves, and so they're kind of stranded here in LA. And so to ask advice, he calls a friend of his who was the creator of a band called the Melvins. They were coming down to LA to do a show, and he kind of called them up to say, I'm stranded, I don't know what I'm doing. And this guy, Buzz Osborne, ends up telling Dave, hey, few weeks back, whatever, I brought Chris Novoselic and Kurt Cobain to a show to see Scream. They saw you play and said, this is the kind of drummer we need. And they didn't really have a permanent drummer at the time. So very quickly after that, in the fall of 1990, Dave Grohl flies to Seattle to join Nirvana. Now at the same time, Eddie Vedder is living in San Diego when Mother Love Bone falls apart after the death of their lead singer. Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard in the fall of 1990 regroup, write some music, have a demo of 3 songs that have no lyrics, and they are on the lookout for a drummer and a singer. And so they approach Jack Irons with this cassette tape, mail it to him, and say, would you be interested in being the drummer of this new band, whatever it is? And he kind of replies that he's not interested, but he ends up giving that cassette to a guy he played basketball with by the name of Eddie Vedder. Eddie very quickly writes lyrics to the 3 different songs, one of which would become Alive, one of which would become, I believe it's Once, and mails the tape back to Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament. Again, pre-internet. Mails it back to them. They listen to it. They love it. They invite him to come join their band. So with Dave Grohl and Nirvana and Eddie Vedder in a band that was previously called Mookie Blaylock but became Pearl Jam, they both play their first show with each band just weeks apart. The albums 10 and Nevermind end up being recorded just weeks apart from each other. Then 10 ends up being released in late August of 1991, and Nevermind is released on September 24th, 1991. So they're released just a month apart from each other. So the fact is that you have 92 albums that have gone diamond in their lifetime. Just as a reference, 500,000 copies sold is gold, 1 million copies sold is platinum, and 10 million copies sold is diamond. There's only 90 such albums ever recorded, And these two bands recorded these albums, add a new member, record their albums, and release them all basically within the exact same timeline. It's amazing. And on top of that, if you're a music fan, look at this show lineup. This is the Red Hot Chili Peppers with opening bands Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and that's January 2nd, 1992. Nirvana and Pearl Jam are opening up for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, who were releasing themselves. This was the Blood Sugar Sex Magik, their highest selling album of all time, that was also put out, I believe, on September 24th, 1991. So you had this window of time. Oh, by the way, gotta mention this as well. Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger, which was their first giant album, was also released, I believe, September 24th, 1991. So you have these things that new music is just changing all at once. But this concert is hysterical in the fact that the two opening acts, they only did 5 shows. This one is in Salem, Oregon, which is hysterical. This is about 80 miles from where I was living at the time, and somehow I did not go to this show. But there were only 5 shows that were ever done with that lineup between December 27th and January 2nd. And then following this, I believe Nirvana left this tour to go record their first appearance ever on Saturday Night Live. One extra little piece of context is that Nirvana's Nevermind comes out September 24th, 1991. I believe it's November 27th. It goes both gold and platinum. So that's how fast that album was selling. And to put that in context, that's 1 million albums sold in a little over a month. Bleach, their first album, at the time that Nevermind came out, had sold 40,000 copies. So that tells you how this thing just exploded on the scene. And even though Pearl Jam's 10 ended up going diamond, it didn't go gold, I believe, until February of 1992. So you can see how Nirvana's album came out, exploded on the scene, and kind of helped along this entire kind of Seattle sound and made people interested through concerts, through connections or whatever. This entire kind of Seattle thing exploded based on that album coming out. All right. So where we are headed now, we've seen where they lived, we've seen the rehearsal space, we've seen the recording studio. Once you've recorded an album, you actually take that stuff that you've recorded, that raw material, and you take it to another facility most of the time, and you do what's called mixing. And for those who don't know, mixing is where you take all of the stuff that you've recorded on 2-inch tape and you kind of play with the levels to really find the sound of what the album will be. The equivalent of this in the entertainment industry, if you film something, is when you go to color correct and you go to sound design and you go and do those finishing touches to something to really kind of sweeten everything that you've done. And so for that, they went to a place called Devonshire Studios, which again is right here, North Hollywood, Burbank. It's amazing how much stuff of this is really close together. And this is where they took their raw material and mixed it. So it is interesting to note that in the 30 years since this was recorded, this mixing studio has turned into much more of a studio where they record animation voiceover. So a lot of those rooms, those soundproof rooms and other stuff like that, they lend themselves very well to either industry. But this here, this Salami Studios, this was formerly Devonshire Studios. And we'll pull around here to the back and you'll see where you would pull in. So this gate back here is where you would pull in and park your car. And I'm actually going to go up here and do a little U-turn and come back around. But yeah, so the story is Butch Vig was actually going to go in and mix this album. And I guess the recording label got a lot of this mixing stuff and they decided to go to a different mixer to finish it. So they were here for probably a week after they recorded the album, but a lot of the final mixing was done later on. So yeah, as we pull in here, you can see this is the parking lot you pull in. That covered area looks like where you'd enter from the back. And And an interesting story from here they told during the 20-year anniversary, Butch Vig and Chris Novoselic and Dave Grohl, was that Ozzy Osbourne was actually in this studio while they were mixing. And he was recording his vocals. Now, when you look up the dates of when Nirvana's album came out and when Ozzy's album came out, the one that he was probably working on was an album called No More Tears, because I believe Nevermind came out on September 24th of 1991, and Ozzy's No More Tears came out a week prior, I believe it was, also in 1991. So that was probably the album that he was working on. So normally this would be the end of the tour, but in doing research for this, I saw an interview where Dave Grohl let it slip that their favorite liquor store while they were here in LA recording Nevermind is actually a very famous liquor store. So I figured I'd drive you by there and give you that look. And you can see it here coming up here right on the right. This is Circus Liquor right here in North Hollywood on the corner of Burbank and Vineland. And if you recognize this clown, you may have seen it. It was in Clueless. It's been in a lot of different TV shows. It's a very iconic sign. It's a very iconic liquor store. And it's just an interesting footnote that in going back and forth between all these locations, Circus Liquor is kind of a central hub, so it was probably a normal way for them to end a day and come by and grab some beer to enjoy their evenings off after recording. So I'm going to pull in here so we can get a better look. There's also an interesting story that Dave told. You can see there's Circus Liquor and the clown icons are everywhere. Back there on this, up here on the side. But this clown right here, Dave and Chris, when they did their 20-year interview, mentioned that they nicknamed this guy Alky the Clown. So that's a little funny side note to, they found Alky the Clown every evening, grabbed themselves some beer, wine, hard liquor, whatever it was, to enjoy their evenings off. So let me pull out of here. So that is it. That is the tour of the locations where Nirvana hung out, recorded, did their work while they were here recording Nevermind. I hope you enjoyed it. On the channel, I'll be doing some future tours of movie locations, TV locations, just kind of showing you Los Angeles in general. So if you like that, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you next time. All right, testing. Pretty good. All right, so as of right now, in May, so normally the studio, so a cool story about this is that, oh, somebody's coming out here. You know, I watched an interview a couple of years back with, hoo-ha, traffic. All right.